Welcome to the Raising Cinephiles podcast, a show about passing on your love of cinema to the next generation. I'm your host, Jessica Cantor, and I have worked in all facets of the entertainment industry for the last 20 years, and recently became a mom. My guest today is Emily Best, who discusses how she introduces film and TV to her children, and how she's discovered some of her favorite stories from her childhood haven't held up to today's values. Always remember that myself and guests are speaking from personal experience and not giving parenting advice. Let's go ahead and dive into the episode. Hi, and welcome back to the Raising Cinephiles podcast. This is Jessica Cantor, your host, and I'm here with Emily Best, the founder and CEO of Seed&Spark, a platform that makes entertainment more diverse, inclusive, connected, and essential. And I am very excited to talk with Emily today because I believe when we first met, she was pregnant with her first child. And I remember being so impressed that you were able to go to Sundance in your early pregnancy because I could barely do Sundance, not pregnant. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I was, 10 or 11 weeks pregnant, and I got so sick. I got a flu that lasted like 12 days. So I don't totally recommend people go to Sundance pregnant. And certainly now I would say bring a mask.
Yes.
Like it was always a vector for disease even before COVID times. So yeah.
Yeah, it's just, you don't sleep. You're on high altitude. People are drinking. If you're not pregnant, it doesn't matter whether you're drinking or not. You're dehydrated and everyone leaves with the Sundance plague is kind of we called it. But yeah, so I'm going to kick us off with my first question, which is, what is the first film you remember seeing?
West Side Story as a film. So I was in kindergarten, sort of 5 years old, and my mom was having a really hard time getting me to kick my pacifier habit. But her whole thing was like, once you go to school, you can't have a pacifier anymore. And my negotiation apparently was like, well, I have it after school. And she said, sure, but only for the length of one movie. And I found a movie that was not one, but two VHS tapes. And so the movie I most remember watching the first memory I have of watching a movie is sitting on the floor of my mom's bedroom and watching VHS tapes of West Side Story until the second tape wore out, which was fine for me because that was like the scarier, sadder half of the movie. And so really just watching the first half of West Side Story over and over again.
And did you actually like the movie?
Yes.
Okay.
Loved it. Are you kidding? Like all the dancing and they were just so cool. And my mom had a super crush on George Chakiris and was so charmed by him. And so I was just fascinated by all these characters and all these relationships and how it all translated into dance and music. So I think it was also very formative in many ways.
Yeah. Did your family have any rituals outside of your after-school ritual of watching a movie?
We really didn't. My mom worked in cable starting in the really early days. And so she was single. My parents were divorced. So as a single mom, I spent a lot of time with my babysitter watching, what are those? Oh my God, I can't even think of the name. The ridiculous soap operas. Like watching soap operas in the afternoons. And then my mom was always sort of a tester for the latest version of cable. So we always had all the channels. And so a lot of the movies that I watched as a young person were old movies. A lot of Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, things that were on these like burgeoning movie channels. And then little slices of things that my mom was watching on this new channel called Home Box Office that were probably too mature for me, but they were movies my mom and I would just watch and rewatch. So movies like Baby Boom, which was obviously like very formative. And so I would say like for me and my mom, it was rewatching movies that we loved. And it was almost always actually on TV. So it was like long after they had been in theaters. Because like she's a single mom. Like when is she going to go see these movies on the big screen? Yeah, so we'd sit in her bed and we'd pick up a movie wherever it started and just watch till it was over.
Baby Boom is an interesting one, being that you're a CEO of a company and the whole seeing is believing, right? You saw both a working mom and that movie stuck out to you.
But Baby Boom was like the template for every single subsequent Lifetime rom-com of like big city woman goes to country, meets man, gives up the life for the simpler thing. It was just like the first and best.
First and best. And also Her Simple Things also was a booming career.
That's right. Right. Which was like a super successful baby food business.
Yeah. The today version of that is the woman who creates a yoga pant company or something. Like
Tribeca Alba
yes.
becomes a billionaire from Honest Company and not from her.
From her, like her actual career.
Exactly.
And do you have any movie theater memories?
My strongest movie theater, the sort of like the like self-appointed pep squad of my school were these two like enterprising young women, Aviva and Charla. And they would like get everybody together for all of our spirit rallies. But then they actually started organizing when the second set of Star Wars movies started to come out. They organized like giant groups to go after school, and we would pack the theater as high school students, and they'd be doing cheers, getting this half of the room to say Star and this half of the room to say Wars, like just sort of treating it like a pep rally for the release of these really big films. And that was so much fun. It was like so much more than just going to the movie experience. And in Sacramento, we had these theaters that were built in like domes, but there were two of them, so they were boobs. So like as teenagers, going to see movies in the boobs was just like inherently funny, and that was a big activity for us. I would say the most formative of mine from a cinema perspective was I had a friend, she was a year younger than me and way cooler. Her name was Amber. We played soccer together, and one weekend she was like, come to the Tower Theater with me, there's this movie I want to see. And the Tower Theater was the only independent movie theater in town. Yes, like an offshoot of the original Tower Records, RIP. I'm from Sacramento, California, the birth of Tower Records. And the Tower Theater at that time, and I still think just has two theaters. The seats are terrible. But it's a beautiful old janky theater. And she took me to see an Iranian film by Makhmalbaf called Gabe. So this would have been, I think, 1996. And I had no idea what to expect. It's kind of experimental film in many ways. It tells the story because the Gabe is the kind of carpet that comes from that region that is typically woven with a story in mind, with these very simple figures. And it's about color, and it's about culture, and it's about story. And I just remember the film finishing, and I couldn't get out of my seat. I was just like staring at the screen, being like, I didn't know this could happen like this. And really not understanding anything about cinema or really the craft I had just witnessed, or like who he was in the canon. I had no idea about any of this. It was just a friend of mine who dragged me to the theater, and I thought it'd be cool to say we did it. And I did not know how it would make me feel. And that really set me off to be much more open to the cinema experience. And then after college, I moved to Barcelona. I enrolled in music school, and one of my roommates, a wonderful burgeoning cinematographer named Xavi, basically gave me a Spanish cinema higher learning, like higher education in the couple of years we were living together, of Buñuel and Almodovar and Almonavar, and watching all of these films on the tiniest imaginable television. I'm 12 inches, maybe 15 is what we had back then. But watching that cinema with somebody who could really tell me all of a sudden why things were working and why they were successful. And that was, I think, the first time I really thought about film as a craft that like somebody I know might be involved in.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. When did you discover it as a craft? And then is there a movie that you can point to, if it wasn't already these ones that you just spoke to, that made you want to work in film?
No, it was the movies I didn't see that made me want to work in film.
Explain that.
So I was producing theater in New York in the like late aughts, early 2010s. And my friend Caitlin FitzGerald was in a play that I was producing, and she had done It's Complicated with Nancy Meyers. And so like her career was really taking off, and she had these big agents, and they were sending her out on all these auditions. But when you're fancy, then you get to call them appointments. So she was going to all these appointments for movies with big independent directors, Whit Stillman, Noah Baumbach, etc. And all of the roles that this like incredibly bright, really well-read, intelligent, raunchy, hilarious woman was being asked to audition for were exclusively pretty girl, pretty girlfriend, pretty best friend, hot best friend. That's it. And at that point, I was watching a lot more theater than I was film because like was the water I was swimming in. And I looked up on screen and I was like, yeah, hang on. Where are the women that I'm having the pleasure of spending time with? Where are these like bright body, wild, successful, challenging women in modern cinema? And I just didn't see it. There were like little tiny examples or people who took parts that like weren't the main role and was like, yeah. And that was really what inspired me to get into cinema was could we tell stories about women that represented what was actually true and not what Hollywood would say was okay enough.
That makes a lot of sense with the platform that you've built and enabling filmmakers to tell their own stories. Curious, instilling a love of cinema important for you as a parent?
It's really important to my husband, who is a big cinema lover. More than cinema, I grew up on TV because, as I said, like we had all the cable channels, and so I was exposed to as a child was a lot of old TV, a lot of I'm talking like Mr. Ed and I Love Lucy and Witched and Patty Duke and all these amazing sort of coms that I credit for, I think, having decent comedic timing, among other things. And so I really want my kids to watch things that make them more interesting, smarter, expand their worldview. My husband, who's such a deep lover of the cinema, has been the one to like take the kids to the movies and really give them that experience. My son can watch a movie. Like he can sit and he can watch it from beginning to end. My 4-year-old, we're really grateful for Bluey, apart from the fact that it is some of the greatest television that has ever been made. And I stand by that fact. And if you haven't seen the Flat Pack episode of Bluey, I highly recommend everybody go watch that. It's one of the maybe 11 greatest minutes of moving picture content ever to be made. But I'm grateful for the shorter format because my 6-year-old has always been really compelled by the moving picture and really likes whole movies and can talk about what happened and get really invested. My 4-year-old is not that person. So the 11-minute contained episode is perfect for her to like get an idea that kind of inspires her to go do something.
That's really interesting. My son is 15 months, so I still have a lot of exploring to do with what he loves and what he doesn't. He does right now. I'm a single mom by choice, so I do rely on Miss Rachel to get ready in the morning.
Great.
And she's wonderful. Like he really finds her compelling, and sometimes I try to show him something else, and he's resistant at first because it's not Miss Rachel. That's because that's really all he knows on the screen outside of audio. Or like when I watch TV, I wear earbuds so he can't hear anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's been interesting about what, but I've not heard that about Bluey. So it's one I should add to my list of
It's
okay.
a brilliant show. When my son was really young, we were pretty resistant to getting him into television writ large, just like waiting on screens is definitely better. And we all know as parents, like, you need all the help you can get. And so we started with Elmo's World, which we would only show him in the bathtub. And part of that was to make bath time an easier time. And part of that was like, that felt like a really good, you're learning, they're capsule episodes, they're short, and they're about one object learned from a bunch of different angles, which I think is something that the sort of Sesame Street canon is always really brilliant at. And what we started to discover was, and so my son was around that age, like maybe 18, 19 months probably. And then he would disappear and we couldn't find him. And he was sitting in the bathtub in all of his clothes because he wanted to watch an episode. Yeah, but Elmo's World was really helpful like that in those early years because who doesn't love Elmo? And also because it was so much about the development of language and concepts. And there's babies in it. He always has a sort of ask a baby about a thing. And of course, the baby can't say anything. Babies love watching babies. So yeah, so that was sort of the turning point. And we do live in a golden age of children's television. So it's been really fun to go through the Daniel Tigers of it all with him. And yeah, I have Daniel Tiger to thank for successfully potty training my children. And we have subsequently passed on all of our Daniel Tiger wisdom to our neighbors who just potty trained their son using the same Daniel Tiger methodology that we did. So yeah, I think there's a lot about it that's just now designed to help parents in material ways that we didn't have when we were young.
Yeah. And so with your film experiences, you mentioned you watched with your mom in her bed as like a family moment together. Do you create those moments of like family watching, the four of you?
Yeah, we try to. Having siblings, these two, and my son now increasingly wanting to sort of differentiate himself from his sister, we have a harder time landing on things. And so this is a thing, like when I was growing up, what was on TV, what was on TV. Now they're very used to being able to like make the TV do what they want it to do. And so my husband and I want to sit down and like watch tennis or watch the Great British Baking Show or something that could be family television. I'll just be like, this isn't kids' TV. I hate it. And peace out. Similarly, just getting the kids to agree on something to watch rather than have the box itself dictate what there is available. With so much choice that we've discovered, that's like sort of a new hard thing to manage. But we now have like designated family movie nights. Popcorn is required. So I make popcorn and we all sit in the bed together and we watch movies. And typically they're the big new kid canon movies, right? When a new one comes out, we'll sit down and watch it together. And inevitably I'm like sobbing by the end and my kids don't understand what's happening.
Do you remember what was the first movie for family movie night?
The first movie that I watched together with my son was Moana. And he was really sick and we were running out of ideas. He wasn't yet 2. And so we put on Moana and he was super interested in it to a point and then kind of didn't focus once again. I was sobbing. But then he got really into that movie, so we got to watch it a bunch of times together. And so a lot of what we do is find things we like and then rewatch them together. We can come back to them again and again because kids really like that repetition. They sort of like to know what's coming next. So Moana was the first one. As a full family, this is for terrible reasons, but me and the kids got COVID last year. And I think that was actually the first time that I was able to get all 3 of us to sit and watch an entire movie uninterrupted. And so but it was not just one movie. We watched our way through the Frozen canon. We watched our way through the Wreck-It Ralph canon. We was like, Disney and Pixar had all our money. The most fun one we did together was Turning Red. We had a big family like pile in the bed movie night around Turning Red, and my kids just love the music. And so they were getting up and dancing, and it was really fun. Yeah, I think that was the last one.
And they're at like a pretty big developmental difference still.
Yes.
Like 3 and 6, like 3 is still kind of toddler, and 6 is like, all right, I'm starting to take in the world in a new way, and you can start passing on the things that you loved to your kids.
That's right. Way. Yeah, they unfortunately, because like I'm the primary breadwinner in the family, so I don't get to go to the movies with the kids very often. The movie time is usually, and because this has all been happening in COVID, still try not to go to crowded movie theaters. So their movie going happens like on a weekday when there's a day off from school or something like that, as opposed to at a time where like I used to go to the movies on Saturdays with my mom. And like we don't really do that anymore. But they did finally all go to a movie together recently, and it went about as expected, right? My son was super excited and my daughter had to get up 4 times. But I think in another maybe year we'll be in a good spot.
Are there any films that you're really excited to show? I'm sure because your kids seem to have very different taste, each kid.
So I was so excited to show them Bedknobs and Broomstick. Did not go well. And also, that movie doesn't hold up exactly as you might like. So that was the first one. Yeah, and a lot of the big musicals are things that I grew up watching and loving, and I'm so excited to share with them. But they've only just tipped into the place where something that's not animated is interesting to them. So literally just in the last 6 months, my son has actually started like voluntarily watching live action at all. And so now I feel like the door is opening to us showing him all sorts of new movies. Like we also tried to watch the new Space Jam. That was a mistake because it was nearly 3 hours long.
That's insane. Like 90 minutes.
This is the thing. So one of the challenges of certainly of modern day movies is like they just don't flip an end anymore. They just don't end. So like also wanting to show them some of my favorite old movies. And the problem is a lot of them are now don't really hold up from a 2023 values perspective.
Yeah, I've been hearing that. The one that it's come up so far in every single conversation, and you're older, your son is probably the perfect age for it, is E.T.
Oh, yeah. He would probably love that movie.
And your daughter may like find the Drew Barrymore character compelling.
My daughter literally just doesn't sit still for longer than 12 minutes at a time. So regardless of how compelling she finds it, like we'll be up and down. Yeah, I would love to show my son E.T., Goonies, like there's a ton of these movies. And then there's movies that I'm like, ugh, I guess we're going to skip Sandlot because it gets real rapey at the end and like it's a bummer. There are these movies that I loved as a child that I think I'm going to probably bypass for my kids because, or at least until they're a little older and we could actually have a real conversation about what we're seeing and what it means. Yeah.
Where do you go to decide if a movie is appropriate to show or a television show is appropriate to show your kids?
We've been relying a lot on the parental controls. So my kids have access to the Disney app and to Netflix and to a Prime Video Kids subset, and that's it. They don't go on YouTube. So we've been sort of reliant on that. And then if Cody's watching something new, I just try to check in and watch it. And a couple of times I have stepped in and been like, you're not watching that thing. And I will try to explain why, like what it is about the show doesn't fit with our family's values. So there was like a live action Richie Rich series that starts with the purchase of a French-made robot. And I was like, what? And so I just talked to him about like, this is a show that treats women as objects, and that's not how we value people. We think all people are humans. And I tried to keep it in language and he was mostly just annoyed that he wasn't getting what he wanted. But then he doesn't watch it, which I appreciate. And then there are things that kind of push from a certain maturity standpoint, just like my son likes things that are kind of scary. And there's like a Jurassic World series that came on that was like, the story was wild. And he loved it. And it had intrigue and it had evil people. And yeah, and he was really compelled by it. And so I just try to check in and pay attention to what he's watching so that when the hard stuff comes up, we can have conversations about it. But I have been really reliant on parental controls to at least create guideposts.
Thank you for that. I'm trying to figure out what that all is and means. Like, do I have to watch it first before I show my kid anything? Or
so having been raised by a single mom, I was like left alone with the television for a lot of time in my life. I watched a lot of stuff that was like outside of my understanding or expectation. And I'm okay. There's a little bit of me that's like, there's not one, like I definitely got shown a horror movie when I was like 7 or 8 years old at a cousin's house because the babysitter was there. And like, it was really upsetting to me for a long time. I wish I hadn't watched Arachnophobia as young as I did because I didn't stop checking toilet seats for several years. Like, so there are those things and conversations that you can have. But like, for the most part, this idea that like absent YouTube, that a kid is going to watch like a movie or show that is going to like guide some sort of parental context or capability, I just don't think is true. Like, I don't think we watch TV shows and then construct entire personalities or like realities. And I think as long as you're having conversations with your kids about what they're watching and what they're taking away from it is really important. The thing that I have found is nearly impossible to avoid is the binary gender construct. It's just so deeply written into everything and most things that kids are watching. And that's the one that like I think is, and it's also just like worst at the school level, obviously. That's been the hardest thing, to find things that I think like help kids understand a more expanded view or a less constricted view of gender. But beyond that, like I don't think TV wrecks us.
The thing that's been interesting about these conversations is how much cinema especially opens up worldview and understanding of the world, and how it's a great impetus as they're younger, film and television, for great conversations as a family, especially for things that are slightly more mature so that they know what's coming.
Yeah, I really look forward to being able to watch like movies that all of us, I love the Disney canon, whatever, they're amazing. But I really do look forward to watching movies together. I listen, my husband and his parents, they see everything and like love listening to how they talk about movies and what they talk about and how they refer to other movies. And they have this real language in their family that talks across all of these, like all the awards movies. They see all the awards movies. And so getting to talk about them, I think is really lovely. And they always have something to go to and something new to talk about. Yeah, I love that. And I hope we have that sooner rather than later.
A good need for compelling family content that doesn't have sexual violence or guns.
I would love a society like that.
Yes, but we have to imagine it, I think, first. There aren't movies like The Goonies or Stand By Me coming out anymore.
I feel like Thor, the latest Thor movie, most recent one, I watched that and I thought there's a scary character who's legit really scary, but the whole thing is that he sequesters this group of children, and so he's always interacting with these children. And it's I watched that and I thought, not too long from now I would feel comfortable watching that movie with my son. Like, I do think the of the Marvel canon, I think the Thor movies are really feel much more made to me with kids in mind, and like have mature jokes that I think only the adults would get, or that you might be able to explain. But yeah, I actually was sort of surprised at that time. And I'm not a Marvel, I don't really understand the MCU. It just feels like it goes on forever and they're all interrelated, and I'm joining a conversation that's already been going on for a while. But that as a standalone made me feel like maybe that was something I could bring to my kids, that there aren't kinds of violence that we couldn't talk around. It's more the kind of perpetual hero exceptionalism and like, yeah, that piece of it is a little bit harder and more insidious.
And so to finish us, last question is to ask if you could recommend a film that would help my son love cinema. What film would you recommend?
Oh my God, that's such a good and such a hard question. What film? So for a very young person.
And it doesn't have to be tomorrow. Like, it could be recommend at 4 or 5, or even like bypassing the getting him to like movies, like recommending a film to love cinema as a high schooler.
Some Like It Hot. I feel like you can't watch that movie and dislike it. That would be cause for immediate disqualification as a friend. Oh my God. That's the hardest question I think I've been asked about cinema. The film to help you love cinema as a young person. I think exposure is really interesting. Like, I want to go back and watch this Makhmalbaf film now with like nearly 30 years distance from it. But I think foreign films are a great way to do it. I think I'm thinking about for high schoolers specifically, like the thing that actually did it for me was feeling like it would be cool to say I had, and then not realizing the experience that was going to happen. But it has to happen in a theater. Like, you've got to take them to something at Vidiot's when it opens in LA. You know what I mean? It's as much about the place and the experience as it is about the piece of film itself. I think if you're watching good movies and you're talking about good movies, necessarily there will be interest there. And I think just don't teach him too much about the movie business before he gets to start watching movies.
Yeah. And why expand on that a little bit?
I think it's an easy way to escape kind of difficult film situations, is to start to kind of pick apart the filmmaking. It can make you stop actually paying attention to what the person wanted to say, what the film was saying. And I think that's a really special thing to be able to preserve, is to really just take it for what it is and what is presented to you, as opposed to having a whole lot of opinions about how they should have done it.
The reason why I think this is so interesting is when I've talked to is in the movie business, right? So their kids understand that movies are a craft or a business, and the responses from their kids of the films led me to believe that they don't suspend disbelief, and like how important exactly what you're saying is, just to get swept up into the world and the story.
Yeah, I think it's also why I think taking kids to the theater is so important, because I think you learn suspension of disbelief in the theater even more acutely. And if you can do it in the theater, you can do it in a lot of places. So I think children's theater is amazing. I grew up going to see, my mom was really good about when we would visit our family on the East Coast, we would take the train to New York and we would see something on Broadway.
Have you taken your kids to see any theater yet?
We've seen some puppetry live that they loved, and we've seen some like variety comedy that they love, stuff that was really age appropriate for them, and some live music that's like geared towards kids, and they just love it. And I'm lucky now to be near the Alliance Theater here in Atlanta, which has an amazing children and youth theater, like program and repertory theater. And it's a wonderful place to be for that.
Atlanta Ballet comes out of Balanchine, I think. So they probably will have a beautiful Nutcracker.
Yes. And they also do the ballet and the theater collaborate on children's stuff as well. I was there for a meeting recently, and they were doing a daytime children's program that was this collaboration between the theater and the ballet that was just beautiful.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
This is really wonderful conversation and really thoughtful.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
If you enjoyed the conversation, please don't forget to like and subscribe. New episodes release every Wednesday. And leave a comment and let me know which movie you think I should show my son. Until next time, take care.